All right, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the Microsoft HoloLens and the UK Ventilator Challenge. So as we all know about what happened back in March, the UK government launched a call to arms to ask British industry to help produce critical ventilators. A number of companies came together to respond to this call to develop 20 years worth of ventilators in 12 weeks, which is insane. And we have four great speakers who are going to be here to answer some questions about what that process looked like and how that all happened. I'm joined today, and thank you so much for joining, Brandy Moore, who's the EMEA Sales Director for Microsoft, and we have Alex Woolner here from PTC. And we also have Paul Pereira joining us, who was the former VP of Technology for GKN Aerospace and now is the tech lead for My Mask Fit. And Kyle from Ovid, hopefully we'll be signing in momentarily. In the meantime, we're going to first start off with a presentation from Paul, giving some kind of background and detail into what happened with this project. And then we're going to have a chat and a bit of a Q&A with the speakers. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. So I will just share my screen. Is that good, guys? And we'll start with this presentation.
So good afternoon, and thank you for taking time to bring me to the stage, Aisha, and looking forward to talking about the application of mixed reality, in particular with my focus over the last year. We were busy making aircraft components at the beginning of the year. By about the 25th of March, I was on a phone call with the Prime Minister, and as part of GKN Aerospace, we pulled together a team with the Formula One companies and the high value manufacturing catapult, which I led with Dick Elsey, to pull in Microsoft. And this is the presentation I'd like to give around how things have changed in our air, not least that we don't have any aircraft flying, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, which is to talk about the advantage that we can bring from mixed reality into manufacturing environments. I'm going to take the time to just take you through a few slides to explain the journey, most importantly to take some lessons away from that journey, and hopefully we'll cover these grounds. So we're going to talk about the factory of the future, the agile principles. We brought in the Formula One teams, so we're going to talk about how we use them. We're going to talk about what does digitalization really mean when it comes to manufacturing, and how do we benefit programs of activity with the lights of mixed reality in delivering productivity gains, one, but also being safe in the environment that we now live within, and also to recognize that we will all need to adapt, and how we're going to change. Obviously, you know, the biggest change that we saw at the beginning of the year was the NHS pressures around number of ventilators, and that's why I stand here today thinking about this next surge that we're about to see. And obviously those ventilators will be hopefully not used, but if they are, they're there and available as a result. We went from a stand-up of a supply chain that was completely new between two different products, one with Penlon and the other one, which I'll talk more about, Smiths Medical devices. We went from a rate of about 50 a week to thousands a week, and we ended up doing 14,400 or so in 14 weeks. So what we have here is a bit of a scene of the ventilator factory. One of the things that we did early on was to build a digital twin of both the ventilator and the factory, so that we could accommodate thinking around how we would socially distance, how we would train and instruct people. You can see the complexity of that particular virtual reality demonstrator that we created with a small company who does this, Big Slice. And then we built on that to create an interface into the ways of working. We actually built a discrete event modeling solution on the back of that, so we could actually work out where the bottlenecks in the factory were. We looked at the inspection technologies and used Hololens to help us understand whether we had the actual parts that we expected in the goods inwards. Because many people hadn't even seen the parts that we were producing in a brand new supply chain, and let alone understanding whether they fitted the medical regulation, which was all new. And we also built on virtual collaboration and the ability to use the Microsoft HoloLens and the Dynamics suite to connect people together so that they could see what was happening in each other's factories without having the challenge of being in an unsafe environment or spreading the virus. And we also did a lot of work on training the assemblers of all these components. In the end, we had over 80 something, 88 I think it was, Hololens 1s and 2s, and our largest deployment has been to Rolls-Royce and GKN, and I think then on to Ford, and into the Airbus factory of the AMRC Cymru in north of Wales. So between the 100 odd people we had taking those around to train people, we had 3,000 people trained by the end of the period, assembling using HoloLens. So we did a lot of work early days, which is really important. So on the 25th of March, my daughter's birthday, as it happened, we got a call into the Cabinet Office, and the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary and the Duchy of Cornwall was in there talking to us about the desperate need to get hold of ventilators with an urgency that we'd never heard of in scaling up any manufacturing before. We were asked on day one, effectively, of that journey to assemble a team across industry. We did so ahead of time, and we brought the technology partners in, like Microsoft and PTC, who are going to be talking with me on this platform today, but also the likes of Autodesk, Accenture and Avanade. We also brought in quite a lot of initiatives, including some startups, to bring in some pace and urgency to the agile kind of ways of working. So to give you a little idea of that timeline, between day 0 and day 14, we took the whole Formula One design capability of 7 Formula One companies, from the likes of McLaren, Formula One, Williams, Mercedes, AMG, Red Bull, Williams Advanced Engineering, and brought them all together. And actually, for the first time, they were working on a design of something that they weren't competing on. They were collaborating. And what was great about that is we saw the pace that they said that they were working at was faster than that they'd ever worked at within their own factories. So interestingly, we got off the blocks very quickly, as you can imagine. We spent 4 days over the weekend, first weekend, doing a design review. We had a design champion in PA Consulting who was constantly going back and ensuring that the medical regulator was happy with our design. But we ended up getting a design into what we call the fast make supply chain, which included the Formula One supply chain, Renishaw, who were great partners at GKN. And we built the first components for 3 sets of the ventilators in 4 days. And literally on the Monday after closing the design off, on the Friday, we ended up bringing to the table 3 ventilators on the Thursday, testing them, and they were put into a medical grade qualification process and were confirmed fit for purpose. So that's the pace that we were working at using Agile, but that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have access to the facilities, to the people that were working on the ventilators inside Luton with the use of the PTC products. We actually used HoloLens to record the standard operating instructions. Effectively, there weren't many paper-written ones available for us to relay to the masses that we were going to be using. So PTC helped us record using Vuforia all those standard operating procedures. Once we had the design in hand and the manufacturing processes in hand and the test facilities being built, we had to go out and acquire a volume of supply chain which we didn't have access to until we turned on the tap of Rolls-Royce and their supply chain, with Accenture pulling out all the purchase orders and running the system. We trained people up on HoloLens from about the 14th day, or the 5th day to the 14th day. We'd actually, in that timeline, brought on board Avanade, who took the design that we had created, and you'll see that on the next slide. And this is the design that they took on. We used Autodesk Fusion 360 because all the Formula One teams and GKN and Renishaw didn't have access to the same CAD package, and we created a digital twin, 812 components in that design of the ventilator. And when you see the explosion of the bill of materials, you'll begin to see the complexity of this. It was not something insignificant to pull together a mechanical ventilator. We chose probably the most complex set of drawing instructions, so we ended up digitizing all of those and then pushing those into the supply chain, which was important. But we also used that digital data to recreate the training materials that we then used in HoloLens. So here we go. This is the start of the journey of digitalization. We still need the CAD reference data, and we need to make sure it was accurate. We then took that digitalization of the manufacturing supply chain, but also into the standard operating instructions. And we built out a capability to create those as assets which were digital, so we could distribute them widely and to many people as we could, taking the need of paper off the table. And Thales came alongside us with PTC and Avanade to drive through the program to get all the training material up and together and out to the multiple production lines. We ended up with using mixed reality to record and capture, and then we also used a mixed reality using HoloLens, obviously, to replay those captures back to the intended audience of the assembling factories. We also built in to the ways of working a machine learning algorithm for machine visioning, and we took components through the process of being converted from their CAD form through a machine that learnt every single component, looking at it through the lens of a camera, and then developed a tool that would allow us to confirm that we had the right part before we went into an assembly. We used that and then broadcast that into the HoloLens as well, so that you could see the component in your hand and you would be able to tell that it was the right component by verification using the AI inspection tools of Anomalous, a startup company that we created with Boeing and the ATI accelerator. That was a really important sort of venture. It took about 4 days to train the AI algorithm, but we learned an awful lot in the process. Some of the capabilities and some of the gaps still exist in getting to 100% qualification using AI, and that's one of the areas of improvement that we would take forward. And then finally, we were going into assembly of more complex components. We decided to partner with Avanade, and we will have a video here of how that worked. And basically, we worked alongside them, taking that data set that we had from the original Autodesk production 3D CAD data into a dynamics guide using HoloLens here to show what the operator would see as they took the virtual and the physical together and blended that for mixed reality purposes to help improve the speed and performance of the way in which we were working. We used Power BI from Microsoft to do the business intelligence and work out which assembly points were pinch points. We could learn from that, which people were assembling things quicker than others. We also learned from this, where the areas where we might need to split the production down and look at discrete event modeling again to improve the performance of our overall system and make sure there were no bottlenecks in the assembly centers. What we learned from doing this is obviously, you have to have good data to begin with. You need to be sure that you've got the right culture of people to take on board the learning. And some factories, without naming which ones, were better than others. The Rolls-Royce factory in Bristol picked up the HoloLens very quickly. Maybe the demographics of their team was a bit younger and had a lot more opportunity to explore the use of HoloLens before. But certainly we saw some clear advantages. When we started to share the learning between different centers of how people were assembling, we learned from that and could apply the learning directly into the guides. So here's an opportunity for everyone to think about, can you get productivity out of mixed reality? We believe so. And how do we do that? We built a kind of a structured approach through what was a very rapid sprint, if you want to call it that. We built out a huge collaboration solution. We used MS Teams to help us do that to begin with. We replicated production lines using PTC Vuforia, capturing the standard operating instructions effectively from the source in Luton with Smiths Medical. We kept people in the production environment safe because we weren't putting lots of people in amongst the teams working in these environments. We then used the training material. Actually, it wasn't just 1,000 workers. We had 3,000 workers across the Penlon and the Smiths Medical devices working on multiple sites. I think there were 7 lines in total. And we were able to conduct really high quality training. I think the other benefit was obviously the dynamics suite and guides, but also remote assist, which came out of the benefit of using HoloLens across a number of sites. And finally, we ended up making sure that this was all tenanted on a single tenant so that there was protection of IP and easier to move people around. And one of the learning points here is you need to have the right data integrity and structure to make sure you can manage the deployment of such a large scale of mixed reality. Here we had over 100 HoloLenses in total, I believe, by the time we ended up those that were from all the AMRC and the high value manufacturing centres, together with those from industry. And thanks to Microsoft for helping us get them all to the same standard, which was a big challenge in its own right. So there were mixed reality HoloLens 1s and 2s, and all brought together through a collaboration. And that really is the key insight. Obviously, collaboration is the heart of the ventilator challenge. Collaboration is the heart of our future of manufacturing going forward. Some of the learning between the Formula One teams was really interesting because they never used to collaborate in this way. And they learned something from this about how, if you've got a single common purpose, obviously you can do things faster. One of the things we've learned from this is, getting people literally on the same page was really important. And MS Teams provided an access point for everyone to be at the same point in the journey. And if they weren't there, they could catch up. So even those people that came on later into the program could learn. Obviously, PTC Avanad's solution helped us prepare people for the adoption. And one of the things they did, they worked with us to make sure that people were familiar with wearing the devices, understanding the benefits of those devices, and understanding how they could lean up their enterprise very quickly. Once they saw the benefits, I think we found people speeding to an agile way of working, close to what we saw at some of the startups, but never quite getting there. So one of the things we learned from the Anomalous partnership is everything needs trust, and we needed to bring on board a solution that was inspecting at quality levels that were unseen before of a machine learning algorithm built in these timescales. And obviously it took a little bit of time for people to believe that this algorithm could be as good as a human. But we soon learned after training it for some 4 days that we could get there. So one of the things we must learn from this experience is technology is not the answer, but it certainly can be a big enabler, but also build up the people and the collaboration experience. So for me, just rounding out here now, I'm taking that journey one stage on and building a custom fit mask business, which is using all the technologies and then the learning from the ventilator challenge so that we can solve medical grade masks for those people that don't fit today's standard mask, which is over 20% of the population today. And we're working across the world in various research centers with the US, in Oak Ridge, in India, and in Kenya through a university partnership we built there. And we're hoping to bring to market through a program all of the concepts of digital manufacturing using the best of best technology, but to serve our key workers with the best protection equipment that they can have. So you can imagine in the future, scanning your face, whether it be on a mobile app or a HoloLens, and having a new mask that's custom fit and reusable to your doorstep 2 days later. And we're going to be building that supply chain using all this learning. So hopefully you've got some questions, and I look forward to taking those. And thanks for your time.
Fantastic. You're welcome, Paul. Good timing.
I'm virtually here now.
Yeah, it's great. So thank you for having that presentation for us, and welcome. Thanks for jumping in right on time for the Q&A. I have an image here that I want to share. You'd mentioned in your talk that there were 2 different kind of teams going at the same time. And I have this image that I wanted to share because I think it's pretty powerful. It's a kind of a, can you see that? Is it all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it's just a graphic of the Penlon Scale Up Challenge. I know in your talk there, you were talking about the Smiths Medical bit. But maybe for context, Brandy, if you want to explain a little bit more about like how these 2 were running in parallel.
Yeah, so there are 2 primary kind of ventilator companies here in the UK. So there's Smiths Medical, and then there is Penlon. And the project that we started first really was with GKN and with PTC and with Smiths to recreate that ventilator process in order to really build those. And then simultaneously, still as part of the entire challenge, as part of that ventilator challenge, and still under the HVMC, there was a team working to build up the Penlon. And I think, Paul, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand, they both kind of started on slightly different paths and kind of took different approaches, but then also shared learnings with each other to see, how we could really get to scale as quickly as possible. using
Yeah, so
similar
we could,
technologies and collaboration.
you're right, Brandy. So we created a consortium that had both running in parallel, but there was a core team that ran across them, helping supply chain out, helping some of the core enablers where Microsoft and PTC came on board. So we reached across and took and shared learning. In fact, one of my roles in the early days was to make sure that one wasn't going ahead of the other without sharing that learning. So we took a lot of the initial acceleration that we had in the Smiths Medical team and shared it with Airbus. Airbus then picked it up and moved it further, faster than we did. And then we took some of that information and learning back into the Smiths medical device. So it was actually these two parallel streams actually racing each other, which created a dynamic, which was really interesting. So I would say that one of the benefits from this has been, we could absolutely gauge how much technology we could apply in different areas and then gauge how well we were doing at that. And I think the benefit of us having a pen line solution, which was growing at a rapid scale, took a bit longer to get through the certification process relative to the Smiths one, but it meant that we had de-risked some of the solution ahead of time. So Brandy, your team was fantastic when we had, I think, 88 HoloLens 1s and 2s. We went and pushed them out to 3 different sites between Rolls-Royce and GKN. But between learning how we use them there, and we got the PTC Euphoria solution, I passed on that information to Ford. They learned how to use it. We gave them a few devices from our side. It was a complete collaboration, and it was wonderful to be, part of over, it says 7,000 people in Ford, but in total there's 3,000 people across all those various assembly lines using the tool sets that we just talked about. So one doesn't lead to a different approach to the other. The other complemented the former, if that makes any sense.
Logistically, how did 88 HoloLenses work for 3,000 people?
So, one of the great things about immersive technology is how easy it is to pick up and scale up. One of the things that we learned was people learned really quickly on HoloLens, and I'm sure Brandy and the PTC team will have a set of statistics behind this, but in practical terms, after about 3 days of use, people were able to move on and actually abandon the use of the tool for training purposes. And then they would have some prompts and things like that. So we were able to circulate those devices across large numbers of people fairly quickly.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so we do find that when people are using something like a HoloLens or immersive technology in order to learn an entire new process, the rate of retention of that information and training is 80% higher than if they're reading a manual, right? So, because it really is almost like learning on the job, and they're really being able to actually put the ventilator together while they're seeing, the guided instructions and being able to see, okay, where do they put different things? And that's really powerful because they're actually doing the job while they're learning. And that just really increases that rate of learn and also that retention. So once they now have the process in place, they can go on and continue the assembly process, and the next person can put on the device and start to learn. So it's something that kind of got passed along through the different plants.
And there's something to be said for, I think, the other thing that came back, which was part of the Microsoft suite. We used the Power BI, the business intelligence capability. We actually learned when we first did some of the training where the bottlenecks were. We could actually measure between the sequence of operations and the standard operating instructions using the Avanade learning set, where people were finding it difficult to assemble things and tried to change the guides. So one of the great things about being digital from a perspective of having the digital twin, if you like, and also the digital training, was you absolutely close the loop. And you could learn from each other on the basis of what has happened in real time. And that was really important too.
And Alex, so your involvement with PTC, can you talk a bit more about that and how Vuforia was used?
Certainly, yes. So we were using a particular product within the Vuforia family. So Vuforia is our umbrella term for our AR products. And we were using a product called Expert Capture, which allows the user to wear a piece of eyewear, such as the HoloLens, and to very quickly capture step-by-step instructions from the point of view of the subject matter expert, and then to be able to put them into the Azure cloud and disseminate them very, very quickly and to scale, which was pretty much what was needed in this case. So we took that tool initially And we worked with Microsoft to make sure that the HoloLenses were set up correctly and that the users who were unfamiliar with these devices could get up to speed very quickly. And we used it initially for a factory tour of the Smith site, so that the engineers at the other end at GKN and Rolls-Royce could actually understand how those
work. 30 now. Sorry.
Could actually understand how the workbenches were laid out within those spaces, and they could understand the flow of practice in making a ventilator. So they were then able to take those step-by-steps and break them down and replicate them on their own sites in preparation for when the supply chain came online and they could go into manufacturing. Having done that overall piece, we could then revisit the site with the HoloLenses and the software and make much more granular descriptions of each of the processes involved in the ventilator. And then each of those processes is then published out on the Expert Capture platform, and it can be delivered directly to the workbench where it needs to be replicated. So we had people at the various sites all replicating this process. The other advantage of the software is because it's very granular, very modular, we were able to modify very quickly any changes that were going to be made in that process. Because of supply chain issues, for example, certain parts had to be modified. And so we were able to then reflect those modifications instantly in the instructions. Likewise, when some of the engineers at Rolls-Royce, for example, wanted to change the way a particular process was delivered, so it was more in line with the new parts and the way they were working, they were able to go in and modify that content immediately, so that would then be reflected across the instruction to everyone. So I suppose in short, the software was used to capture all that expertise and knowledge and disseminate it extremely quickly, and then to be able to modify that on the fly in what was a rapidly changing situation.
I think, Alex, just to add to that, you guys provided kind of an immediate response and put yourselves at the danger of being in a factory that was obviously closed down, with most people being restricted in access. So we had kind of a very short and limited time to get in and actually capture everything that was going on. So the incredible bit that was done was the post-processing work that your team did alongside Thales, and to make sure that the relevant capture was made. We actually learned a lot of things that we didn't know about by scanning the factory, because actually today I still haven't been in those factories, nor has many of my colleagues. It was many of your team that with Brandy's team that went in and did the hard work there. But what was really interesting is you scanned just about everything. And one thing we discovered, particularly in the Smiths Medical one, was there were 19 test boxes that became the supply constraint when we were building the ventilators. We needed to get access to those and find out what was inside those boxes so that we could build and test for medical regulation each of those ventilators to a standard. The clever thing that we were able to do there was
so just to clarify, just because there were 19 boxes that were used to test.
Yeah, so the ventilator itself was pretty simple in some respects. It was about 812 components, as I mentioned in the last presentation. Yeah. But there were 19 additional products we had to make at scale as well. And those we didn't know about until Alex's team and Brandy's team got in and helped us scour the factory. And we discovered that there were these amazing test boxes that required parts from all over the world. And we had to go and sort them from China and steal some things out of other people's factories to make this thing work.
So first, so like build all these ventilators, but also actually build all these other things too that need to be ventilators.
Yeah, so if it wasn't for the guys at McLaren and their abilities, and I don't know how they do it, but they reverse engineer a lot, it seems. They took these things to bits with Williams Advanced Engineering, and each of them did their own little re-engineering exercise. So we actually produced 19 test sets alongside the ventilators. And so they were, re-engineering all of those things and all the sub-assemblies for that. It was an incredible learning experience because nobody knew anything about this before the work that, as I say, PTC and Microsoft have done with us. And it all became news to us. And then the same happened in Benlon. We realized there were lots of test equipment that were required to help them scale as well. And we had to do the same thing there.
Yeah, Asha, to just set the stage, like the first weekend that we actually went on site with PTC up to GKN, to train them on kind of the first, 4 HoloLens devices, and to have PTC train them on expert capture. None of us had ever seen a ventilator. None of us had seen we finally got a picture of what the Smiths ventilator looked like that we were going to, or that they were going to actually be producing. But it was.
And Brandy, just to add to that, the pressure was on because the 25th of March, I think it was the weekend that you just talked about, the day after, it was my daughter's birthday, as I mentioned. And the Prime Minister held a call with the Cabinet Office and industry and said, I want as many of these as quickly as possible. So we sat there going, well, we've only just seen sight of what this thing is, and we've got to tell you we can deliver these in certain timescales. Yeah. That's a big, tricky conversation to have. And you were being asked to do a very quick piece of work to work out, how do you build a supply chain, not using your existing suppliers, so a completely new set of suppliers. We didn't even know at that time how many parts were in the supply chain that were going to come through buffer stock to supply, and we've been told to make commitments on how many we're going to build.
Yeah. My God.
The good news is we haven't had to use them all. The bad news is we're heading into a second wave, and we will use some of them, unfortunately. But what we have learned from this, and I think this is the takeaway for anyone thinking about immersive, thinking about virtual reality, there's a place for this. I'm actually working with a series of companies now to help build digital twins of factories, because we think that they're essential. In fact, I just had a conversation with Bath University this morning and said, we're worried about, return to university norms. Could you build a digital twin of a university so we can bring everyone together in a hybrid environment? I think we're working in a new world of how important both the virtual and the mixed reality is going to become. So I hope we've learned and take the learning out of this so that we can help build and configure new factories, new faculties, new ways of working. But I'm pretty sure it's going to change all our lives. And I was just talking this morning with some of Brandy's team about applications in healthcare. I see many, many more. Whether you be in, my father's just about to go into home because he's very unwell. My worry is I might not see him again. But with the tools and technologies that Brandy's got with HoloLens 2, we can at least have conversations in a different way and be much more informed. In fact, in the middle of the conversations at the Ventilator Challenge, I was working 20 hours a day, and one of Brandy's colleagues phoned me as I was cooking for my baby, and that baby hasn't met anybody since we began lockdown, and to this day, I think Brandy's colleague is the only person that has, and we met on HoloLens. So we have some lovely stories of how HoloLens can change people's lives. And actually, Leda, who's been part of that journey, wrote to me the other day and said, I will remember that day for the rest of my life. And I have a bit of a tear in my eye as I talk about it, because it was it has been quite a challenge to get through this program, and lots of life changes. But one thing that's for sure, this technology will actually help the world be a better place.
Absolutely agree with that. I mean, I am completely blown away by the fact that you managed to pull this off. Like, genuinely, I have massive respect for all of you. You were saying, I know you didn't sleep much, as you said, you're working like 20 hours a day. To get an idea, like how many people did you have on each of your teams really working on this? Just
Brandon, I don't think we've been compared notes. So PTC probably had loads as well. I mean, I don't think we ever worked this out completely, but at one point we think there were about 7,000 people in total on the Ventilator Challenge at the spike. And we only knew something of that as the tip of the iceberg. Those people that were using Microsoft Teams as a collaboration tool, I think, Brandy, were up to nearly 1,000 at one point. So if you imagine that those people on the shop floor didn't necessarily have access to that, it certainly was 3,000 people in the assembly centers. And then if you think about the whole supply chain that went with it, I could imagine it'd be more than 7,000.
I mean, from the Microsoft side, we had a couple of us here in the UK that were working on it regularly. And then we had a lot of people that kind of, stepped in here and there to do a training, on say like remote assistant guides or, a training here and there. And then people that also stepped in to support kind of the tenants, the team sites, the Intune management for the devices. So there were a lot of different people that came in at different points, all of which were also on the team's collaboration, all of which were also on call. We also had people from our corp engineering teams supporting from the backup. So they were virtually supporting, you know, any issues with the technology, any questions, you know, that came up that were just not the norm that we could handle ourselves. But honestly, you know, it was also our partners, right? So it was PTC and it was Avanade and, you know, many other partners that were engaged across the different platforms that also really stepped up to make this all happen. You know, it's our partners that we truly rely on, right, for deployment and for building applications like Vuforia Expert Capture, you know, in order to make the HoloLens do what it can do. Without that application, it can't just do that on its own.
I was going to say, Avanade at one point had a 24/7 team working on the dynamics work instructions that we're working on. I can remember talking, you know, at 3:20 in the morning to Dallas, where one of the ladies was brilliant. She said, my mother's a nurse, I want to help you. She was doing this in her own time over a weekend. We had so many people, I think 27 on that weekend, which was the first weekend where we were developing the training material across the world, working 24/7. So, you know, wow. Hats off to all those people involved. And Avanade were amazing by that means. And they brought a lot of knowledge to the table, which, you know, clearly as a manufacturer, we hadn't used the technology. So we were learning as we went, and they provided some training materials. We gave them, shipped a HoloLens out to California, where we had a guy who was going into a factory there to do remote assist. We had people working in various territories where it was really difficult to get access to data. And they took the remote assist in and also the PTC solution through Vuforia. And we were able to do a lot more work, particularly in fault finding and quality inspection because of that. And so it probably saved a lot of time and energy and effort. It'd be really good to kind of work out how much we actually saved. But I can tell you, you know, we wouldn't have been able to do much of this without the technology.
You know, I think in addition to the technology, the fact that all of these companies came together, they put aside their competitive nature. They didn't worry about sharing IP. They didn't worry about, you know, okay, sorry about the dog. They didn't worry about, you know, oh, I'm Ford and this is McLaren or this is Mercedes. All of that just completely went away, you know, and everybody came together, everybody collaborated, and it didn't matter what their day job was. The only thing that mattered was this. And that's an incredible spirit to see happen.
Yeah, I've heard it compared many times to being like a wartime production effort. Like it genuinely was that, like everything else went out the window, and it was just about, you know, collaborating for this, you know, effort for the nation. I'm really, it's an incredible thing that you managed to pull off. You know, that I'm interested in, you know, I mean, you said, Paul, that it took 4 days to get the first design review done, and then you said it took 4 days to train the algorithm to identify pieces with anomalous, right?
Yes, yeah, so we were building things at agile speeds of normally a tack time, I think in an agile cycle is at least 4 weeks. We changed it to 4 days. Okay, so we were learning, changing, adapting, moving on in that sort of timescale. We had great partners who had that pace, like the Formula One teams, but even they themselves admitted this was a pace beyond what Formula One does. So when we collaborated on the design, one to your first point, typically a Formula One car will come to the next race with new parts, okay? But it's not a complete new design from scratch. This is what we did in 4 days. And the only way we could achieve that was by using every single one of the Formula One teams in the UK together. We split the 812 components down as sub-assemblies and parts. Okay. And they went off and remodeled those parts and, you know, brought it together. And we used the partnership there to.
So each team took a chunk of the parts and
right.
got their focus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we then also reconstructed those parts, obviously, in an assembly. We went through a design review. I think it was on a Saturday evening, allowing most of the parts to go through the fast make supply chain on the Sunday. And Renault's factory truck turned up in Luton in I think 11 o'clock with all the parts but one. And the last part came from, I won't say where, but they came and we assembled them all on the Tuesday. By the Thursday, they were all in test and they were signed off. I mean, that was an incredible experience to be part of that. And I've never ever worked in Formula One. I've always wanted to, but I have such admiration for the guys that did all that hard work over those 4 days. I mean, it was incredible. And when we said that that was the timescale we're going to work to, they didn't think it was possible. So, you know, again, that's the first one.
Sorry, you said you set up Anomalous with Boeing as like a new startup,
right,
within this process as well.
Well, the great thing was that we had some fast start capability, because Boeing and GKN as a team worked with the ATI accelerator to create a number of startups. There were 9 in total. We were looking for proofs for concepts for these teams, and then the ventilator challenge turned up, and we said, well, I was going to spend some money on the proof of concept with you for a kind of a nominal set of parts, but now we've got a real challenge. Can you jump in and do this?
Huh.
And these startups had probably hardly worked, well, they certainly hadn't worked in ventilators, but they hardly worked in the regulated industry of the quality that we were talking about, because they were still working out how their technology could work. Came to the table and said, we'll have a go. We don't know how it's going to work, we'll have a go. And they jumped on board. I think it was on Good Friday, and by Easter Monday, they had the first program trained, and we looked at how those 812 parts looked through HoloLens. I was trying it out at my house, and we had some parts that were built in the factory and built in from GKN. Yeah, we had some learning to do, so they rented another sprint, and we built a new model, and we built another one by Friday, and the second iteration was sort of 96% accurate. Not quite where we wanted it to be, but then we went through, you know, final stages of getting some of that into play. You know, the challenge often isn't the technology, it was in the adoption. So we've had to train up the quality inspectors in the DHL facility. Many of them were just completely bamboozled by what we're throwing at them. The one thing that I would do differently this time, if I had another chance, and I kind of do have another chance, I'll talk about it if I get a chance, is to really embrace people's behavior and understanding how long it takes them to come through the journey. You know, being the early adopter is actually a challenge, and I guess I'm an early adopter because you don't bring everyone with you. So one of the things that I think we have a challenge, and one that we can solve within the immersive world, is to find ways to educate people on the possibilities and not to fear the use of immersive technologies.
Yeah, that's a good segue into what's next. Like what's next for, you know, what was the experience like for Microsoft working with all of these startups? Is there like something that's coming, more collaborations coming from this? You must be getting tons of interest, I'm guessing, post lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely get tons of interest, which is great. But I think that, you know, what this has also done is, I think it's really proven how quickly like a manufacturing process can be set up. Granted, this was, you know, exceptional circumstances, right? Where we were able to bypass certain processes as well that we wouldn't normally do, you know, in an environment, because this was urgent, right? And it was urgent beyond anything that's urgent in normal life. But so from a manufacturing perspective, you know, we definitely saw a lot of other companies, you know, coming to us and coming to PTC, you know, really for help in especially kind of that, you know, remote assistance, that remote technical support, because they couldn't be, you know, in their centers. People couldn't travel, you know, to actually help them and keep their manufacturing processes going. So that's something that we certainly saw also happening during COVID, and still now, of course. But I think also in healthcare, you know, there was a whole other simultaneous effort that went on with the NHS, and where we actually worked closely with the NHS and with like Imperial College and a few other medical universities to really help use the immersive technology to reduce the number of doctors that had to go into a COVID ward, but still be able to actually, you know, have the advice and have them see what the doctor is seeing on the floor with an actual patient.
Yeah, I think I saw that in an article in The Guardian, right? Imperial was using HoloLens for ward teaching medical students, right?
For teaching medical students, but also for getting, you know, expert support and opinions for people that had COVID, but they also had something else. You know, so if somebody falls off a ladder in their house and they've actually broken, you know, ribs and stuff like that, they have to be treated for that, but they're also being treated for COVID. And you don't want to put two of those doctors at risk in COVID. And using this technology, you can just put one in the COVID ward and have the other on the other end of kind of that remote technical, you know, support. So that's something that we were able to do as well. That also reduced the amount of PPE that was being used, which you also know was an issue, getting the right amount of PPE for people to use. So yeah, there were a lot of use cases that came out of this that made it very practical very quickly. And we're still learning, right? What's next and what else can we do?
So on the what's next, I've been just talking that through with some of Brandy's team this morning, who happened to be on a big conference that you ran on mixed reality yesterday with Joe and the team. You know, as we've moved back into the second spike, I can see, you know, immediate opportunities to leverage the technology again. You know, one of the challenges that I see ahead of us in the near term is that we're all going to have to start wearing masks, and as a result of what I've done, I think we kind of set our minds on how do we solve the challenge today. The most of the masks that we're delivering into the NHS, they're great, but 23% of those masks don't fit without any customization. And we're looking at customizing masks now. How can you use the technology that we've got? Well, we're looking at, you know, how do you scan someone's face? I've worked with PTC to look at, you know, are there ways to use a mobile device to capture and 3D model a face? And then from that face, can you build an additively manufactured mask? Well, there are options to do that today. The one thing that we wanted to get through is the MHR approval. So we're doing that. So we're reusing a lot of the learning that we've had here to help solve another challenge. And I'm sure there'll be more to come. You know, the other thing that we're thinking about is, you know, in this socially distanced world we're going to move into, I want to get back to my day job of aerospace engineering, but that's going to take a little while. So how about we solve the challenge around, you know, airport and, you know, the customer experience, making sure people feel comfortable, confident and safe going through airports and onto aircraft? Well, could we use a digital twin of an airport and allow people to at least visualize where people may be queuing, and so they can avoid that in advance of getting to the queue by using little IoT devices within the digital twin? So you have the mixed reality of, you know, walking around an airport, but you have some advice as to where to avoid places where there's a lot of flow. But also, you know, in the event that there is a contamination issue, can you use that to simulate who has been infected and be aware of the mitigation paths and where you would want to move people in real time? So we've worked on a little project around that, which is now expanding to a proof of concept. So I can see lots of opportunities for further use of immersive in this pandemic world, and then go beyond the pandemic world, and then we're into, you know, well, how can you use that technology in a factory, Paul? You know, well, the answer is I'm looking at IoT assets that could be tracked and traced and do lean enterprise modeling in a factory. So I can now simulate using discrete event modeling where people are traveling in a factory using IoT devices on people, even align the training material and the guides such that they're customized for where that person's standing relative to a piece of equipment that they may not be familiar with. Then you provide a more detailed, customized learning experience. But it's something they're more familiar with, then they get a different experience. You know, so I think mass customization of training is going to be a key feature of the future. And I'm sure, Brandy, you have some thoughts on that as well as Alex.
Yeah, and I mean, also, I just, as a non-manufacturing background person, I'll just on this call as well, you know, I'm curious about, yeah, and from what I've heard, you know, from the manufacturing sector, you know, the digital transformation journey for like small to mid-sized manufacturers is, you know, it's difficult, it's expensive, you know, it might not be like something that's very accessible necessarily. Alex, I don't know if, you know, what you do with PTC using Vuforia, like how, you know, what you've learned from this might translate into helping those manufacturers on that journey.
Well,
with like Made Smarter going on
yeah.
with there's lots of money for this, right?
Yeah, I think that there was, PTC have kind of led the way to a certain extent with companies like Microsoft in the use of IoT and mixed reality in the industrial sector. And we would spend a lot of our time educating our customers on the potential uses that they could find, because it was something that, you know, they were aware of and through conferences or whatever, but it was kind of on the periphery. And I think what's happened with challenges like this, and obviously the global challenge that we're facing anyway, is that it's really brought it into focus for us. And as Brandy was saying, we're getting a lot of people contacting us now who suddenly think, actually, this isn't just a nice to have bolt on. This is something that's going to be really integral to our business going forwards. And so what what could have been a quiet time for us has been absolutely really busy and really exciting. And so yeah, I think that's the end of that sentence.
Paul, you're on mute. I can see him trying to talk.
That's me trying to do too many things at once. Yeah, I was just going to say, Alex, I've got a question for you, if I can. I mean, where do you see the technology in a year's time relative to where you might have had it on the plan? Because I believe you're going to be speeding up the development of some of your roadmaps as a result of what's going on.
Yeah. So we've got new things coming. So at the moment, we've got technology that links people together. We've got things like the remote assist. We've got ways to capture instructions. But actually, what we're looking at doing now is much larger scale stuff where you're building digital twins of your factory as you build the new factories, and the two things come online together. And we've got software coming that's going to support that, so that people can really embed this technology at the inset of ideas rather than trying to retrofit it. And we still have great capabilities in hooking up very old machines. And obviously, I don't know about in other countries, but in the UK, you go to factories and you see some quite old stuff, but we have capabilities to transform them into digitally connected devices. But yes, going forward, I think it's going to be about planning this stuff into your infrastructure from the off. And we've certainly got customers who are doing that with us now.
So I think that this is the key thing, that I think immersive becomes a bit of a hub for IoT and a simulation coming together. When you walk into a new factory and you might have old components in there, as you've just mentioned, Alex, the opportunity to kind of see the whole flow through the factory by, I can stand up on the balcony over the old factories that I've worked in and begin to see how I could do my lean exercise by simulating discrete event modeling. And I could look through a HoloLens too and see the pathways where people can be improved. And it shows and highlights where there's potentially, in this case, a COVID contamination potential where people might be too close to each other. Then you can zoom in on that area and go into that depth of the digital twin and go, well, if I remodeled that and did a lean exercise, what would it do? But rather than doing it on the factory layout in the old-fashioned ways that I was doing not so long ago with tape on the floor, we could do that virtually. We could do that with much more data enriching, solutions. So I'd love to work with you on that, Alex. It's an exciting future you've just described, and I've got some ideas on that.
And it's also about being able to not, if you suddenly can't go to your site, that shouldn't make any difference. It shouldn't make you any less operational.
Yeah. There's a great question, final question, because we have a few minutes left here. Someone's asking, in terms of the learning through this process and the potential for the future, have any similar projects been applied elsewhere in the world? And has this learning and the potential, is there a potential to place the UK as a global leader in embracing technology in manufacturing?
So if that's Claire's, my first answer is yes, the UK should lead this. I mean, we've got huge potential sitting on our doorstep. I mean, I don't know many countries in the world have got Formula One teams, aerospace, the huge advanced manufacturing centres that we've got across the UK with all these high-value manufacturing catapults that Dick Elsey's brought together. We've got such resources to our fingertips, and why shouldn't we lead the world? I mean, the Silicon Valley of Silicon Valley is happening here in Bristol, as far as I know. So, how do we build on what's already around in the environment? The world is becoming smaller because of technology, but we should stand and punch our weight. I think we haven't done so quite as much as we could do. I know some of Alex's team is, building some real solutions here in the UK, which are then going to be converted across the world. So I think we should stand on the shoulders of the giants that we have amongst us and, leverage the technology. I think now's the best time with everything that's going on in the social environment, but also in the political environment, to do something very different and unique.
Yeah, I would say I completely agree with Paul. I don't know, I don't know if there's an exact replica, right, somewhere else in the world of what we did. I don't think there is. I think the UK was in a unique situation where we really felt we were going to need, that many ventilators, and we were not prepared. We did not have enough ventilators to service, the spikes that we were seeing, and we weren't going to be able to source them necessarily from other parts of the world because they needed them. right? So we had to actually, do this as a country and come together and create this. So I don't think we've seen exactly the same type of thing, but there's definitely, I've heard amazing stories of different pockets of, companies and healthcare professionals coming together, for the good of a nation or the good of the world, and using all different types of technologies to really help get us through these hard times and fight against, this crazy virus that has just turned all of our worlds upside down. So the technology is definitely a vehicle to make this happen, but it's the people working together and coming together, and it's the spirit of the people that will truly make it happen. And I think that's the key piece, and that those people live everywhere, not just in the UK.
I think that's a great note to end on. Alex, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, it's just been a real pleasure. I mean, most of what my involvement with this project was done exactly where I'm sitting now.
And I think it's the first time I've seen you, Alex, actually.
And I was able to interact with all these people and to sit in conferences with a whole new team of people that I hadn't worked with, the week before. And all of a sudden we were all pushing together. We were listening to each other, and we were all working towards a common goal, which was very, very energizing when, we were being told that we couldn't leave the house and all the rest of the things that were going on outside.
So just on that, whilst we've got one final minute if we can, I think we all need to recognize that I think the global pandemic is only a small speck of the bigger problem we've got. And I keep going back to this because I believe climate change is a much bigger problem and will kill many more people than the pandemic. So I think if we could train our sights towards that, think about our future, of our livelihoods of our kids and our grandkids, we need to start working on that solution. And I think if we take the spirit that Brandy's talked about, the people, the mindset, the culture that we've created, and drive further and faster forward to solve that challenge, then I think we'll all be feeling comfortable that we've done our part. But I think technology has a big part to play. But, start with the behaviors, then follow with the technology. I think that's the message from Brandy and Alex and I.
Absolutely.
I love that message. So an even better note to end on. Thank you all so much for your time and to take this opportunity to break down this incredible process that you went through. I really am so blown away by what you've done, and thank you for your service really to the country. I know how much effort you put in, and it's very much appreciated.
No, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for organizing it.
Absolutely. We've recorded the session and we'll have it posted on the Immerse UK site permanently. So it's available for everyone to come and check out whenever they need to. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
You
Take care.
Bye.